Hey everybody, thank you for joining us today. I'm Kim and this is Colby, and we're here live with James Tucker, Director of ADAP. And we're so excited to have you with us today. Thanks for joining. We are going to be talking about all things supportive decision making and alternatives to guardianship. And so we're really excited to share this information with you, and we hope you can get a lot out of it. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and at the end of the discussion we'll get to those questions and answer them the best we can. So the first time that we were here, we shared about Colby and his supportive decision-making team and all of the decisions that led us up to the formation of that team and where we are. And now we have the pleasure of joining Mr. James Tucker of ADAP, and he is currently serving on some very important committees. I'm going to let him share with you, and we will go from there and kind of just roll into it. So Mr. Tucker, would you please share with us some of the work you do with ADAP and the committees that you sit on and serve with?
Absolutely, and thanks to everybody for being here today. Thanks especially to you, Kim and Colby, for coming down to Tuscaloosa so that we could visit and talk today. ADAP is the Alabama Disabilities Advocacy Program, and we provide legal services to people with disabilities at no cost. So essentially, this is a kind of a public interest law firm helping people with disabilities on legal questions that they might have. And that means that we do a variety of things. I mean, literally, one half of the phone calls that come to the front door are on one subject, and that subject is special education. But in addition to doing work on behalf of children in various places, we also represent adults with disabilities on a range of subjects. And then we also have a really important team, that's the monitoring and investigations team. And they investigate, for example, alleged abuse and neglect of people with disabilities, and sadly, that can even include deaths. So that's some heavy-duty work. So that's kind of a really general description of the work that we do at ADAP. We have lawyers and advocates throughout the state. We love doing the work. We love being here. We love serving and working as partners with people with disabilities and families and supporters. And I will look forward to talking in more detail about supported decision making and alternatives to guardianship as we go forward.
Very good. Awesome. So I'm going to give everybody a little bit of background on...
Just take a quick 20 seconds here. We're going to turn that off, and we're going to turn it right back.
Okay, we're back. So real quick, I'm just going to share a little bit of the background of how we came to know about ADAP and how important the work that they do was for us. When Colby was in high school, we went to the Alabama State Board of Education and advocated for further inclusion within the public school system. And that's where we met Nancy Anderson, one of the lawyers here who works with the special ed side of things. And Nancy kind of partnered with us throughout high school with Colby, helping us, give us tips, fill us in on a lot of the legal jargon that gets tossed around in an IEP meeting that sometimes can become really difficult for parents to understand. So it was almost like we had our own personalized interpreters, and we sincerely appreciated that. And Nancy introduced us to James at a conference we were in Montgomery one time. And we just kind of stayed close. And for any of you out there that are seeking definitions of IEP terminology or just need some generalized help, I would encourage you to reach out to ADAP. They can be your best friend. And in the process of Colby transitioning from high school into college, we realized that there was a lot to the supportive decision-making agreements and alternatives to guardianship that we needed to learn about, and we didn't know nearly as much as we needed to. And so then we kind of started doing our own research and digging and realized, guess who knows a lot about that? Mr. Tucker with ADAP. And so we're here with him today to kind of share some of that information and go over the fact that supportive decision making becomes kind of an umbrella term and that gets tossed out there and means a lot of different things. And so we wanted to kind of focus on, that it does mean this and that, but it also can reflect an alternative to guardianship. And one of those alternatives we've chosen is the supportive decision making team with Colby. And we talked a little bit about that last week, but we're going to kind of dive into it a little more this week. All right, and so Colby's going to share some of the questions that we have, and I'm going to let you go. I'm not going to let you go first. You're going to go first.
Okay.
And go ahead and start us off with the first question for Mr. Tucker.
Hey, Shane, will you tell us more about ADAP and...
You got it. Describe.
why the service ADAP way first?
Absolutely. I said a few words about ADAP generally earlier, but let me talk a little more specifically about the subject that we're talking about today. So Colby, your mom talked a little bit about the work that ADAP can do to help students and families, for example, with special ed and IEPs. But let me also just kind of make a pitch to everybody out there in the audience. ADAP is here for you. So for example, to take the example of today, if there is a person who has a guardianship and they feel that the way that that guardianship limits their ability to make decisions about their own life, then ADAP would like to talk to you. And these kinds of limits kind of come in all kinds of ways through courts and the law. Guardianship is just one. But essentially what a guardianship does is, for example, it says, you, person with a disability, do not have the right to make choices about your life, and the court orders that somebody else has the power to make those choices. Historically in Alabama, kind of the assumption has been to lean on the side of what's called a full guardianship, which means essentially almost all of a person's rights are taken away, and all of that decision making is given to another person. And the problem that we have is that that has happened almost as a reflex, and without careful and close thinking about whether it's really the right thing for that person. So what we're trying to do is to support people with disabilities to make as many decisions as they can about their own life. That doesn't mean that any of it is easy, but life isn't easy for anybody. And what we really all need to try to do is a better job of working together to support people. And that may come in various forms, and we've got a lot of time and we can talk about alternatives. But that's kind of the heart of the matter.
Awesome. Perfectly worded. That was great. So one of the things that I also wanted to focus on is that recently you were appointed to an important role that's closely related to supportive decision making with the Alabama Supreme Court, and there's also the WINGS initiative. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what they do and what you'll be doing in that role?
I can, and you know, this is a really exciting kind of movement that's going on nationwide and in our state. So I would say that 10 or even 5 years ago, people were barely even talking about alternatives or supported decision making. And some people may remember Patrick Hackney at ADAP. Patrick and I came across a grant, and we pitched it to some staff at the state Supreme Court, and we said, hey, y'all need to apply for this grant from the American Bar Association. So the American Bar Association, which is a national group of lawyers, it's probably the most powerful group in the country, was giving money to states to work on alternatives like supported decision making. And Patrick and I said to the state Supreme Court, hey, you guys need to go get that money. And that money was the WINGS grant. So we got this effort started that way, and because we had pitched it to the Supreme Court, we've kind of been part of this from the start.
How long ago was that? When was that?
That was about 4 years ago.
4, okay.
Yeah. So not even 5 years ago. So it shows you how recent this effort has really started to gain traction in this state. There are a few states that are a little ahead of us, but we're really making progress. So there was kind of a work group called WINGS, but WINGS recommended to the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court that he formed this new commission. And you know, for lawyers, in terms of kind of officially what's going on, what this means is that the head of all the courts in Alabama has said, yes, we should look at this. We should look at alternatives, and those alternatives include supported decision making. So within just the last couple of months, I was appointed to the State Supreme Court Commission on Adult Guardianships and Conservatorships. And that includes looking at alternatives. And again, there's a whole lot of alternatives, but that's kind of how we got here. But the bottom line, the really important thing is that our state, through the Supreme Court, now says, yes, this is important.
That's a big deal. Do you feel like it's a big deal? I feel like it's a really big deal.
It is a big deal. I think it's especially a big deal for the following reason. And I want to do just a brief little bit of history and context here. And sometimes, you know, in 2021, it's a little hard to remember where we've been and where we've come. We haven't gotten to the promised land yet, but we're getting there. When the Wyatt versus Stickney case was filed in Alabama 50 years ago, there were more than 5,000 people at Bryce Hospital and more than 3,000 people at Partlow. That's more than 8,000 people
At one time.
at one time on one day in 2 state facilities. And conditions were horrendous. Sometimes people died. As recently as 20 years ago, the State Department of Mental Health required a family to get a guardianship to put a person in a facility like that. So state policy said guardianship. Mm-hmm. So when you think about where we've been and what that history is, and you know, when the State Department of Mental Health required it, that is the state of Alabama acting officially to declare and enforce taking away people's rights. So we've seen some change here. And again, we're not there yet. And ultimately, this will come down to making the right decision for individuals, one at a time. What we strive to do is to get it right for each person. But when we fail to do that, we harm people. We make people less than they can be and less than they can dream of being. And I think ultimately, that's what ADAP wants to do. We want to support people to strive for their dreams.
To reach their potential.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah. So Colby's got one more question on this.
Composition making can be light and
Umbrella.
dorm. Can you tell us what else is under that dorm?
What all gets put under the umbrella term?
Colby, that is a great question. And I don't think people want to hear every bit of it. We could be here until the end of the afternoon. But people may have heard terms like guardianship, conservatorship, power of attorney, healthcare directive. All of those things are legal papers that lawyers can draw up and take to a court, and they give the terms by which somebody else makes decisions for a person. So there are a lot of things out there. And one of the things that we're really striving for is, again, this is not one size fits all.
Right.
It's not that, you know, the perfect form of supported decision making is the right thing for every person with a disability. You know, I know a lot of people, and there's a lot of variety in any group of people that you think about. But again, what we're striving for here is how to help individuals and family and friends who care about them, but ultimately the individual. How do we help you get the supports that you want in your life and help support you to make decisions about your own life? That's what we are striving for, just as you strive for your potential. So there are a lot of legal terms and there are a lot of legal tools, but the good news here is that we're making progress in making those legal tools more friendly to people with disabilities, where in the past, basically the way the law worked for the most part was just to take away rights. What we're trying to do is help support people to make decisions about their own life and have as many rights as you can exercise. That's what we want to support.
So when Colby was in high school, one of the IEP terms at the end of the IEP meeting would always come up, and that was the least restrictive environment. And that kind of brings me to this train of thought, is that if you're going to look at alternatives to guardianship, you're really trying to look for the least restrictive environment as far as guardianship or any of those other supports go. Which one is the least restrictive? And to me it seems smarter, correct me if I'm wrong, to start with the least restrictive, because if you go straight into full guardianship, is it not that much harder to get out of if you're trying to backtrack?
I think that's a really good way to put it. And the challenge is then in the state of Alabama, historically, the tool used most often was full guardianship.
Right.
And if there's a full guardianship, basically under Alabama law, it means that the only right that the individual subject to guardianship keeps is the right to vote. Now that's important.
Right.
But when somebody can tell you where to live, who to see, how to spend your time, how your money is going to be managed, you know, all of those things and more, that takes away a lot from a person. So let me give you two concrete examples. In our office several years ago, we had a young adult woman approach us and say that she wanted to get married, but her guardian wouldn't let her. Well, we don't assume when we get a phone call. We investigated and we concluded that that person had capacity and should be able to make that decision for herself. We contacted the guardian to ask if he would agree, and he refused. So we went to court and we won, and that person was able to get married, and she and her husband chose to leave the state and live somewhere else together because they were tired of being in Alabama.
Sweet.
Let me give you another concrete example. I have a client, and of course I'm not calling names, but I have a client, and a couple of years ago he and an aunt grew close. He is a person with a disability, and he said that he wanted to give his aunt a power of attorney, which means give her some decision-making power over him and his life. Well, I talked with him at length and ultimately concluded that he understood what a power of attorney was, what it meant to give that to somebody, but I also let him know that there's a difference between a power of attorney and a guardianship. A guardianship is a court order. A power of attorney is not a court order. And so I explained to my client that if he gave the power of attorney, he could take it back. He signed the power of attorney. We gave the power to the aunt, and a year later he called me and he said, I want to take it back.
Oh, wow.
And that's what we did. And I'm providing those concrete examples to say, again, I think a theme here is there's no one size fits all.
Right.
You said least restrictive. I think really about focusing on what's important to the person, to the individual. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, within this range of alternatives, if we need anything, what's the right fit? One more concrete example. It may be that there's a reason for a guardianship, but it should be limited. It shouldn't be a full guardianship taking away all rights. And there's a way to do that. It's just that in Alabama, when you go to probate court, we literally have had judges look at ADAP lawyers and say, there is no such thing as a limited guardianship. That shows you concretely kind of what we're up against and why this has been a fight or a battle for a number of years to try to get to a better place to support people to make as many decisions for themselves as possible.
So then do you have to explain that there is and they get it?
Sometimes they don't get it. Yes, we explain a lot, but you know, it can be hard to be in a courtroom and tell a judge something that is, and the judge says it ain't.
Right.
That's why there are appeals. But yeah, that's a tough position to be in a courtroom when you're telling a judge the state can do X, and the judge says the state cannot do X. So that's why it's important that we all work together, you know, to lift our voices, to combine our voices. Each of us has a role. You know, an ADAP lawyer has a role. Colby, you have a role. Mom has a role. Every advocate has a role.
Right.
To work together so that we can all do and be better.
100% agree with that. That's pretty much why we're here. So one of the things I've noticed, or a theme that I've noticed, is that while parents and families sit in these IEP meetings in high school, as well-intentioned as staff may be, we are typically told by the time our student gets to the senior year that we have to make a decision toward guardianship. And depending on the student, most of the staff will advise that family, before your child turns 19, you need to go ahead and get that guardianship, or else the doctors won't talk to you, or you can't get their grades from the school anymore, things like that. So it's not really a threat, but it almost sounds intimidating if we didn't. So for our experience, what we realized is Colby wanted to go to college, and we had no idea how we were going to make that happen, or if we were going to be able to see that come to fruition. But in the research of, is this even possible, we began to realize that for a lot of these Think College programs, one of the requirements to be accepted into the program is that they are their own guardian. So we became really conflicted. Here we have the school telling us you need to get full guardianship, while we knew if he was going to go to college, he had to be his own guardian. What do we do? And I just wanted to get your take on why. I wanted to understand why you think, or why it happens that so often and so frequently families are told you need to go and get that guardianship.
I think it's a really important question, and I would answer that in two ways. And thinking about the law is going to be the second way. I want to talk about something that's much more, I think, basic first. And I think the process that you were describing illustrates the way that our society and our culture historically has favored people who have decision-making power to tell other people who don't have power how their life's going to be. I'll make a couple of really simple analogies. I mean, when our U.S. Constitution was made in the 1700s, black people weren't counted as persons, or they were counted fractionally. That's a very basic way for one group to say to another, we have power and you don't. And I think it also reflects, I mean, you know, the traditional civil rights movement in the state of Alabama is an important and powerful movement for the U.S. and for the world. You know, think about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and others. Disability rights is part of civil rights. They're bound together. They're not different, separate. disability rights is civil rights. People are a lot more comfortable in thinking about civil rights than they are with disability rights. But historically, there's not just this power component, but there's also, I would call it, thinking of people as other. We're all different. I can barely see out of one of my eyes. You know, it meant that I wasn't exactly a great baseball player. You know, every one of us has some kind of an issue that we deal with. I think there's a faith component to this. You know, every human being deserves basic respect. And I'm not going to preach, but I do think that it's related to this notion that there's some kind of norm, and if you're not that, then you're other. And being other means you don't get respect. So I think when you think about those two things together, and then, you know, put somebody in a position of power, a principal, a teacher, somebody who tells others how it's going to be. The reason I wanted to say a few words about this is because I think it is vital that we work together as partners in this advocacy. ADAP absolutely wants to be a partner in this process. But you know, we learn every day that we are here to serve, not to direct. And that's when we do our best. As partners with other people and their families and friends. And that's really what supported decision making is about. It's a way to work together as partners to support people to live the lives that we want. You know, that's a little bit of an answer that's not just a legal answer. But then, of course, I would say a quick word about power and the law. I mean, the law is how power gets shaped and exercised. And so we all have a role to play together to change the way that that works for the better. And to come full circle a little bit, that's why getting the state Supreme Court to move on this issue is so important. It shows that where we can get when we all work together.
I just keep agreeing with you more and more. So one of the things Colby asked me when we were coming up with these questions for this interview was the definition of the word incapacitated. It's a word he hadn't heard before, and it's quite frankly not used often. But when we were writing out the questions, I was trying to explain to him why full guardianship was recommended, and that word came up. So Colby's got another question for you about that word, incapacitated.
Will you help us understand what is incapacitated mean? Will you help us to understand what team
Demonstrating.
incapacitated mean?
Well, you know, one of the things that I like about the work that I do is that I get to see capacity every day. And I think one of the challenges that we face in our society is that, and you know, this is just part of the human condition. A lot of us are kind of programmed to be suspicious or maybe even critical of other people. And that's a way of kind of demeaning them and not giving respect. And so historically what happened in the courts is that there was this kind of assumption on the side of thinking that people with disabilities weren't able. And that's a way to think about this capacity and incapacity. Think of capacity as being able and incapacity as being not able. Maybe that's a little bit of a different way to think about it. And so historically, courts took away rights when they decided that a person was not able or not capable of making decisions. Think about that word, capable. Able is in the word capable. So that's what the concept really is at its most basic. Courts said you're not able, we're going to take away your rights. And so I think what the alternatives movement is really trying to focus on, or Colby, as your mom said, least restrictive alternative. Sounds like your mom went to law school. She's using those fancy terms.
That's just an IEP meeting.
I'm going to assign her some reading tonight.
Me too.
But what it really boils down is a question of ability. Are you able? And what we're advocating for is that courts slow down and not be so quick to assume that somebody is not able. Let me give you a concrete example again. One reason why there might be that a court might decide that a limited guardianship is appropriate is because a person makes decisions, maybe they drive, but maybe they get their Social Security check, and the day they get it, they give away all of their money that day, or they get taken advantage of, or it even gets stolen. So a court could impose what's called a limited guardianship and say, you retain your rights, but somebody else is going to manage your money. That's a way to think about, that's a really simple way to think about how do you focus on what is the ability and how do we support the ability. And then if there's something that's not working right, okay, well, let's look at that. Now, guardianship is still a court order and it's still a significant imposition. It's a significant taking away of rights. So that's why other alternatives like supported decision-making, shared decision-making, power of attorney, healthcare proxies, all kinds of alternatives are out there. And one thing that we haven't really explored much today and that you guys are probably the experts on is how does shared decision-making or supported decision-making work? You know, if you're not going to court and not signing a piece of paper,
Right.
then how does a family and how do friends work together to make it work? I think we're still learning how to do that, and we still need to tell that story in the state of Alabama.
I would agree. You had mentioned that this started about correct me if I'm wrong, 5 years or so in our state. For us, with Colby's supportive decision-making team, where we share these decisions, we're only 3 years into it, and it's still not perfected. We've seen a ton of progress, and in so doing, we've seen Colby show us things that he's capable of that we hadn't even considered at the beginning. And so it's a process, and it doesn't happen overnight. But 3 years in, I can tell you, I'm so glad we're doing it this way, and I wouldn't change it for the world.
And people keep saying I can do everything. Like, some people who work with Colby say I can do everything.
People who work with you are surprised,
Yeah.
which they shouldn't be, but they are, when they meet you, talk to you, and see how much you can do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, actually, I don't know if you remember, I've seen you at work and I said hello and you were so busy, you were like getting to the
Wait,
next
where?
person. You were like, see ya.
Where?
You were rocking.
At Publix.
Yeah, at Publix.
Wait, what office do you go to?
Huh?
The one here on campus.
Yeah, yeah, I saw you at the Publix here, the university campus.
Yeah.
You were working away.
Exactly. So I think it's important to explore all options very carefully. But for us, it was really important to explore this because there was a measure of support. If for no other reason, I needed to feel okay about sending you miles and miles away to college off on your own. But also because you're about to get to the point where you're going to be way more independent and don't need me anymore. As much as that might crush me, he's not going to need me, right? So for us to be able to see him make decisions for his own self and do so with supports that are minimal, that's the best feeling in the world.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of an extreme way to think about it, but I have a really good friend who is the mom of a young man who's now an adult. He has a disability, but she said early on, and this is, I'm not saying everybody should agree with this, but it's just a way to think about it. She said that she knew that he would be happy the day he came home and said, Mom, I got arrested because he had done something wrong.
Because he did something wrong.
Yeah. She said that would be when she knew he was living the life of an average teenage kid. Now,
I can see that.
I'm not saying that people want to run out the door and go get arrested, but it's an interesting way to kind of pose the question,
Right.
how do we think about it? My brother got arrested when he was in college, Sometimes that happens.
How closely are you living
That's
to
right.
normal? Right?
Yeah. Okay. Now that's not the goal to get arrested, but I'm just saying, it makes us think about the question, what's the comfort zone?
Mm-hmm.
And what can we tolerate? What's normal?
Mm-hmm.
So I throw that out just it really is kind of a question to think about.
That circles back to what we talked about last time we were with Colby, which was that dignity of risk, and that's always there, and it's always an important one. So that's a really good example. Okay, so my next question for you is basically when we realized that shared decision-making, supportive decision-making had all of these options, and that we were going to create a team for Colby, and that we knew we didn't want to take away his right to be his own guardian. Then it wasn't a question of if anymore. We knew what we wanted to do. It became a question of how. Then we started to realize, okay, there's actually 100 different ways we could do this. And it was not necessarily confusing, but it was difficult to navigate. And so when we went online and tried to research team agreements and what that means and how it's done, that's when I had the aha moment. That's when we realized Alabama's not set up for that yet. Doesn't mean that you can't do it. We're doing it and it works well. It just means that if we were to walk into a courtroom right now and try to explain it, the judge may or may not understand what we're talking about and may or may not necessarily agree that that's the best way.
You've said a lot.
Yep.
And you're right about all of that. I think one thing that's a big help is that if we walked into a courtroom today, as opposed to even a year ago,
Right.
the fact that the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court has created a commission on this subject would help us. There are 67 different probate courts in Alabama because there are 67 counties, 67 different judges. And so probably if we walked into that courtroom today, the experience would vary a great deal.
Sure.
Depending on where we were and who the judge is, and the openness of a judge to hear about new things. But the reason this Supreme Court Commission is important is because what's different now than from a year ago is that now the Chief Justice in the state Supreme Court says, yes, this is something that we all should consider and be open to. And I don't know that law can change minds and hearts. Martin Luther King wrote and thought a lot about that question. But law changes the rules. And, sometimes when you change the rules, then eventually minds and hearts follow. It's related. One doesn't happen without the other. So it helps underscore why this new commission is really important in the state.
Very good. Colby, your question's up.
Why do so many fans get advised to become their child guardian when they turn 19 here in Alabama?
Colby, I think that's a really good question. And I think a lot of times, historically, families were told to get a guardianship when a child turned 19. First of all, because 19 is when you become an adult in Alabama. Second of all, they were told that for some of the reasons that we talked about earlier, power, fear, but ultimately one of the big reasons that families got told to become a guardian when a child turned 19 was because of money. You know, we finally got to the subject, money. Money, you know, they say money makes the world go round. I think money is what you make of it. If money is your God, then you might have a problem. But if you can understand what money can do to help serve your interest, money is a tool, if you will. It certainly has a value, but often families got told to get a guardianship at 19 because of fear about money. Essentially, families were told that if their 19-year-old son or daughter went to the car dealer and signed a contract for a $50,000 car, then the family could be responsible. None of these questions have perfect answers. You know, Colby, if you walked down the block today and signed a contract, that's a contract. You are responsible. You have to pay that money. You know, if you signed the lease for your apartment, somehow you got to come up with the money to pay for the lease every month. So I think that's really what a lot of it came down to. It was fear about money. Parents were afraid of getting stuck with a bill that they couldn't pay. And that was kind of the end of it. Nobody thought anymore, nobody looked anymore, nobody looked at alternatives or looked at, is this realistic? How would this happen? What do we, how do we deal with it? It was, again, I've used the term, it was just kind of a reflex. It was almost automatic. Mm-hmm. Supported decision making is harder. It takes work. It takes commitment. It takes partnership, which means it means reaching out and working together. And I think all too often, people even, the best intentions, they fall back to what's easiest, not what's right. And I think that's what we're talking about today. Mm-hmm. How do we do a better job of getting to what's right?
I would also agree with that. The experience we've had with Colby's team has not been easy, but it hasn't been hard. It's just taken some deliberate, intentional effort on our part to make sure things happen. We don't just say we're going to do something. We actually do it, and there's follow through and there's accountability. Definitely not the easiest way to go. We could just not have a team, right? The team members could say, no, we don't want to be involved, but it's certainly helpful and definitely worth it. I would advise everybody listening to look into that as an alternative.
And I would just say very quickly, if people have questions or want to talk about decision making for a young person or any person with a disability or family, friends who have questions, ADAP is really interested in talking to individuals and families about these kinds of questions. We want to help people work through these kinds of questions.
Absolutely. Definitely got a recommendation from us, that's for sure. One thing I want to talk about real quick before some of our last questions is when you were talking about those fear-based decisions that people make, decisions people make because they're afraid something might happen. That brings me back to a time I can specifically remember, which was kind of the reasoning behind us going forward with this team of supportive decision making. But it happened when Colby was little. He was 4, and I don't even know if he remembers it. Mm-hmm. But we were at the Galleria in Hoover, and at the time it was a really hopping place. Lots of people.
Back in the day.
Back in the day. And at the Galleria, the court where you go to the where the food is, the food court and the carousel and all that was all open, right? And at the time there used to be the Disney store there, and that was one of Colby's favorite places. And in the back,
there.
you do remember that?
No, they'll have that there.
Oh, I don't know, but the Build-A-Bear.
Do you have a favorite Disney character?
Oh. I like Mickey Mouse.
Mickey.
Pretty
He's always loved
fine.
Mickey.
It may not be Disney. I gotta go with Yogi Bear and Boo Boo.
You don't remember.
It may not be
That's
Disney,
our age, but
you know,
yeah.
I love them.
Yeah, they were good too. Always funny.
Well,
Hey,
did
Boo-Boo.
that came out.
When I was a
He
kid.
watched it. He watched it. But at the Disney store, in the back of the Disney store, they had this huge display. It was almost like a giant mountain of stuffed animals. And they would let the kids go back there, touch, play, get in, have fun. And Colby was still learning to walk at the time. And so I loved the fact that he could go into that mountain of stuffed animals and just be free. And I would let him, and the store management didn't seem to mind. And so Mom got a little bit distracted this particular day, and I was off looking at something else at the front of the store. I didn't leave the store, but somehow in the process of Colby not walking, right, he managed to fly out of the store. I never saw him leave. Totally lost it. When I went back to look in the stuffed animals, y'all should have seen me. I was throwing the stuffed animals around, digging in, screaming for help. He wasn't there. He was gone. Long story short, I go out to the food court and I just went up to the information center. I said, I can't find my child. I need you to help. This guy there with a walkie-talkie, the security guard got on. He stood still. I specifically remember I wanted him to move and go find my child, and he just stood there on his walkie-talkie, which is I'm sure they're instructed to do. But he told all of his security guard buddies to look at their exits and check for this child I was describing. As these moms in the food court were hearing me in my panic, they surrounded me and all came up to ask how they could help, strollers in hand. And I specifically remember it was the best feeling in the world. I saw probably within 5 minutes this team of moms go do what I wanted that security guard to do, which was go out, go walking, go calling, and help me find my child. And sure enough, one mom did. He was down, I don't know if you remember those water massage tables at the time. He was just standing at a water massage table, staring at the water massager. I think he was entranced with the mechanics of it or something, but she took him by the hand and brought him back to me and found him rather quickly. And I looked at the security guard still standing there on his walkie-talkie and talking to everybody about it, but not really doing anything. And that became to me one of those aha moments a little bit later on. And the value of community, the value of the people who maybe have walked in your shoes, or at least could understand how you feel, or at least want to get involved, right, was huge, especially in that moment. But that's kind of the same concept that we see happening with Colby's team, is that there are all these people in our community around us that want to be involved. They want to go out and help you reach your potential, help you get to where you're supposed to be, right? And all we had to do was ask. And it wasn't even a hard ask. It was just would you consider? Of course we would. I mean, nobody even said no out of 10 people. So that moment and that realization of you don't always have to go straight, no offense, you don't always have to go straight to a lawyer. You don't always have to go to who is there, right? And we just thought that was kind of cool and wanted to share. But
How old I was?
you were 4
Was like
and apparently could
3.
walk a lot better than I was giving you credit for.
I was 2003, well.
That was probably 2003, you're right. Yeah. You just demonstrated capacity right there.
That's right. The stroller moms were part of the community group, but you had flown the coop. Mm-hmm. Your mom made an assumption about your ability to walk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, as a parent, I can appreciate that, and I can hear the power and the emotion in your voice, Kim, when telling that story. But Colby, I think it also tells all of us something, that even at our best, even at our striving, even when we care, we may still be missing something. You know, that day in that moment, your mom was thrilled to find you, but she had missed something. And it wasn't just you scooting out of the store. She hadn't, you know, like it hadn't registered that you could walk and do that. And that's what led to the fear for your mom. You know, as the parent of two girls that may be a little older than you, but not much, I mean, I can relate to the story. And I think it helps illustrate and enforce. You know, it's not my role to put limits on my children. It is my role to support them. And I think that kind of comes back to what we're talking about. How do we support one another? And how do we try to figure out how to do it the best we know how? But even at that, we're still going to miss something, and you, Colby, are still going to teach us something.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You've got that one.
We
got it. We're on that one.
Okay. What are your next steps in this for people like me with IDD in our state? How can we help?
Next steps.
Next steps.
Boy, that's a really great question. You know, how can we help people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the state of Alabama, to use an old phrase, be all you can be? We've got a ways to go. I think about the supports that are available from, for example, the state of Alabama. This is a little bit of a formalistic answer, but for people who really struggle with capacity, sometimes they need what's known as waiver supports from the state. And right now, our state still does not do a very good job of supporting independence, supporting self-directed services, and we really need to do a better job of that. And I would say that one thing that I would throw out here is that literally today, some of you watching may already have seen that there's an advertisement going out for, and we're really excited about this, the State of Alabama DD Network is going to restart Partners in Policymaking. People have been urging this for the last several years, and literally today an application went out electronically asking for people to serve as advisors. Those advisors will choose in the next couple of months the first new class of partners in the state, and that's going to start in October. And I can't tell you how excited we are about that. And the reason that I'm talking about that as a way to think about answering this question is because, again, it's a way to think about the theme of partnering, working together. Lawyers don't have the answers. Photographers and videographers don't have the only answer. Mom doesn't have the only answer. Colby doesn't have the only answer. We all need to work together. But maybe even more than that, in our state, we need to do a better job of not just supporting, but lifting up and championing self-advocacy. Your voice, Colby, is your voice. And I want to support that. You know, I'll close with this brief reflection. I've been a lawyer for 35 years, and I want to do civil rights law from the start. And, you know, I think I was respectful of people at the start, but I've also learned some lessons. And partnership is a huge lesson. Originally, what I thought about as a lawyer in 1986 was, it's my job to fix your problem for you. And hopefully what I've learned is that the higher calling is to work with you. Let's work together to try to make things better.
I've always believed that 2 heads are better than one, and in this case, 12 heads are better than one, right? Okay, thank you so much for your time. Alex just gave me a scroll of some people that have some input and some questions, so I'm just going to read through them real quick. Miss Corey. Let's say hey to Miss Corey Merchant is listening. She said this is some great information. And it looks like Sharon Henderson, Sharon Glenn Henderson, says that there's a medical, and yes, people should always have the right to choose. I'm assuming the medical directive probably.
Yeah, there's a medical and a healthcare directive. There are ways to do that, and ADAP can talk to people who want to explore those options.
Very good. And Ms. Corey reminded us disability rights are civil rights. The two go hand in hand, right? So the next thing Ms. Sharon said after that was that there's always a medical component. There's also a medical component, such as the insurance tells you that you can have only what we say you can have, not what the person always needs.
So let me say a word about insurance. That is one of the things that's scary and can be fear-inducing for parents. And the commenter is absolutely right. I mean, just because we're talking about what we're talking about doesn't mean an insurance company is going to behave differently.
Right.
What I want to offer or underscore, though, is that for parents and individuals who are interested in doing this, ADAP can help you think about it and support you so that you can deal with the insurance company. Yeah, none of this is easy or automatic, and there are real questions that are out there. But what's important about this movement is that there are ways to deal with that.
And support.
Yes.
Through the ADAP to help you navigate. Because to me, the David versus Goliath concept comes back. For me as a mom, I remember when Colby was little, the conversations I would have with health insurance were way above my head. And 90% of the time, simply because I was the David and they were the Goliath, we couldn't get what we wanted. Knowing we can partner with somebody like ADAP is huge.
And I would just say that, health insurance, I mean, people think of private health insurance, in Alabama, Blue Cross Blue Shield is 90% of the market. But Medicaid and Medicare both provide, if you will, health insurance in a different way. Mm-hmm. So however you're dealing with those health coverage issues, ADAP wants to be there and partner and help families kind of navigate those questions.
Absolutely. And Miss Gina Richardson says, hello. This is great. Lots of friends we know.
Who is that?
She's one of your friends down from Montgomery.
Oh.
Yeah. All right. So if anybody has any further questions, feel free to put them into the chat. When we finish, we're going to go back and put some of the resources and those links into the chat, ADAP included. And so hopefully we can get some more questions answered that way. But thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you, Mr. Tucker, for donating some more of your time and clearing up some of those questions that I know a lot of people had. And Colby, you have any final last words? Anything you want to say?
Thank you for coming today.
Yeah, thank you.